From inside the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Baseball Show. Paul Mancano and John Meoli live on a Wednesday in July to talk about the Baltimore Orioles rotation and why it is performing exactly like we didn't expect it to. We'll also do our minor league check-in, and we'll take a look at the Orioles about 23 games out of the trade deadline. All that and much, much more. But first, let's get a quick word from our sponsor.
For the fifth year in a row, Toyota is the best resale value brand according to Kelley Blue Book's KBB.com, including the 2025 Grand Highlander, best in resale value for midsize SUVs. Toyota, let's go places.
All right, John, we were supposed to go live yesterday. We had it all set up. We had the stream set up. We had the article published on the BaltimoreBanner.com. And then I pulled a hamstring like every other player on this Baltimore Orioles roster. Just kidding. I got violently ill out of nowhere for no apparent reason. But I'm glad we're back here today. And if you see me leave in the middle of this podcast, you'll know why.
Yeah. We kind of flipped the script. You know, usually I get here within 1 minute on either side of the exact time we said we were going to do this. And I was not only early yesterday, but you were not in here. And I got very confused.
Yeah, I was not well.
Yeah. You know, it's okay. It's okay, Paul. I have to say, I talked to people in the wild yesterday who know that this podcast exists and have listened to it or enjoyed it visually. I don't know how much you can enjoy, like, you know,
us
visually.
What about the plant?
Yeah.
Come on.
The wall.
Yeah.
It still blows my mind.
Did they like what they saw?
I don't have the heart to ask if they like what they saw. They say that it's good audibly. Okay. Audibly good.
Great. That's all we strive for. If you can get one of the two, maybe one day we'll improve our visuals, but that would involve us being more attractive than we currently are, most likely. I did upgrade the wardrobe recently. Went to Nordstrom Rack, and not a sponsor, and kind of tried to get on your level.
If we could get sponsored by an off-price retailer, it would have to be Marshalls. I'm sorry.
Marshalls, yeah.
That's I am here.
90% of the time John comes in and I compliment his outfit and he says, thanks, got it at Marshalls. So
the Marshalls across the street is fantastic.
Okay.
It is one of my favorites.
Maybe next time I upgrade my wardrobe once every 3 to 4 years. So maybe next time I'll check out Marshalls. We'll see.
There's another way to do it where you just buy like one shirt that you don't need every 3 weeks for your entire life.
I hate that. I can't get behind that.
Yeah, it's fun. You should at least try
it. If you like what you hear or see, by the way, write us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and I will read it out here on the show. We are also live on Facebook again today. We used to be. We are again. We are live on X as well as YouTube and now Facebook on Baltimore Banner Sports account.
For all the aunts and uncles out there.
Exactly. For all the parents and aunts and uncles. Before we get into the podcast today, I do have to issue a mea culpa because I not only said, but I also printed the name of our intern incorrectly. It is Liana Handler, not Liana Holder. I had a different noun in there. And honestly, synonyms, handler, holder, same kind of thing.
Okay.
But I botched it. I feel like that's sort of our version of hazing for interns, is to get their name wrong. But I not only said it on the podcast incorrectly, I also put it in a graphic incorrectly. And it wasn't until she brought it to my attention. For an outstanding article she did, too, in her debut article, she's been great. She does not deserve to have her name missaid. And yet, here I was.
Yeah, she's been great. I flagged that in the moment. I didn't know what to say because we were under strict orders, Kyle and I, not to talk during that segment. You were just going to say what you needed to say about all that because it's not, it's not something that, it
was not a lighthearted segment.
It's not a moment for quips.
No.
So I should have said something. I'm sorry.
It's okay. No, anytime I am wrong, and I'm frequently wrong on this podcast, I want you to actively call it out, John.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right, let's get into our Orioles discussion today. The Orioles are currently, do a quick standings check here. They're 37-48. They're 7 games out of the last wild card spot. 23 games to go before the trade deadline. Mike Elias had a conversation with our own Danielle Allentuck, which you can read on the BaltimoreBanner.com. Subscribe $1 for 6 months, where Danielle asked what his plan was for the rest of the season, and in particular for this trade deadline. And John, it was kind of the answer I expected. You know, he was still expressing some optimism that the Orioles would climb out of this, that the Orioles would somehow make a miraculous second half turnaround, make the postseason. But at the same time, he was preparing and is preparing for a deadline where he will have to sell. He said, quote, "We're going to have to be realistic about the situation. And the byproduct is that you have an opportunity to make some trades that set yourself up better for the near future or the long term. So we're preparing for that scenario," end quote. That is kind of what we expected Mike Elias to say.
Yeah. And it's what he will say. It's what he will, be doing. My understanding is that they're kind of still in wait and see ish mode. I don't think there's been like a go, no go, like, check if that's nailed down, just assume it's nailed down type assessment happening. But I do think, and this is, for the purposes of people who do this and talk about it and think about it and write about it and live it like the fans do, I have a sense, given how they've operated in the past, not just buying but selling, that this is not going to be like it would feel very strange to me if it was like July 17th and they're like, okay, like actually we are going to do this and like set the market. I think they're going to let the market come to them. They're going to kind of last year's deadline when there was just like a flurry of deals at like 5:45 or whatever the time that could happen was. There's been a lot of cases where it's been those last couple days before the deadline where they do that. And of course they're going to do that because they could be on some crazy winning streak then. And maybe you want to do something differently or think about it differently. But the reality is that pretty much since that doubleheader in Boston, Perez Day, as we can call it, or Trevor Rogers Day, if we want to be more positive, they have been like kind of the team that you thought they could be. And over the course of, if they continue to do that over the course of 4 months, they will be just shy of being a playoff team because they were so bad at the beginning of the season. And there's not a lot. It takes a lot of heavy lifting to think anything other than like, we just dug ourselves too big of a hole. Let's reset this and be better next year to beat the plan.
Yeah, I agree. I think no matter what happens, it's going to be much closer to the actual deadline that they really start making moves. I think back to the 2018 season, which is a nightmare season that Orioles fans wish that they could forget. And the Orioles at this point in the season on July 1st, they were 24-59. And that's when they were so far out of it. They had so little to play for that they really started trading guys early. And the Manny Machado deal happened during the All-Star game. That was when Manny was like on the field taking selfies with his future teammates on the Dodgers.
Yeah.
I don't think the Orioles are going to make any moves one way or the other that early. They could make some minor moves, but I don't think that they're going to say trade Cedric Mullins in a week. I think it's going to take a while if they do end up selling. But yeah, the way that I've kind of come around to this, John, is that I am of the belief that it's great when the Orioles can win a couple games in a row like they have, and then they, like we've said, lose one devastating game like they do last night. They get blown out, and it sets them back so much. I have come around to the point now where I say, if they don't sell at the deadline, if they don't give up the pieces that are going to be free agents this offseason, they are missing an opportunity because they really cannot afford to take a step back in 2026. And if you have the opportunity to upgrade your 2026 team, your farm system for 2027, perhaps, you are missing an opportunity if you don't take advantage of that.
Yeah. And what's challenging at this point is, and I think we're going to talk about this a little bit in the rotation, like what we thought were the tradable players are in the first part of the season, the most recent part, have not been. I think there's going to be a lot of value in their bullpen. I think that's going to be the area where they could really, every team, I think they might have done it with Jorge Lopez. I think there was enough control left where you can say that it wasn't like a rental reliever for somebody really good, but like those are the best trades when you trade a rental reliever and get like or you get a real player back. Those are the trades that it's just, you think to yourself, this is it. We did it. And Sir Anthony Dominguez has been awesome for the last month and a half. Gregory Soto has been really, really good. I don't think anybody's entertaining the idea of trading Felix Bautista, but those are the pieces that you would assume would not be here next. You really just have to think hard about that. On the contrary, with a Cedric Mullins, who has I just pulled it up here because I was interested in what the answer was, who has been really challenged, and since May 1st, I think back to the Trey Mancini trade in 2022, where they ended up getting a good return for him. Trey Mancini was having a pretty good season that year. And there's this added weight of are you going to get back enough for his meaning? Not necessarily his value, but his meaning. And I think we might be starting to have that conversation about Cedric Mullins, and in the sense that the return for the player that he has been in over these last couple of months is not necessarily going to be super exciting.
Yeah, Trey Mancini, that was such a weird case too, because Mancini was having a good season. His last kind of moment at home was that bizarre inside the park home run.
Yes.
And then he goes to Houston and really, really struggles with Houston, and kind of, plays himself out of a huge payday in free agency. He still got a 2-year deal from the Cubs, but he hit just 176 in 51 games with the Astros down the stretch, and then struggled so much in the playoffs, didn't get a hit until, I believe, the final game of the World Series. And then, that was kind of a great monkey to get off his back, but plays it into a 2-year deal. But Trey Mancini, now going to be a free agent again.
Yes.
With the Arizona Diamondbacks after he opted out. If Kobe Mayo did not exist, boy, it would be nice to have Trey Mancini back. This team just needs good stories. That's all I'm looking for.
That would help the vibes.
That would be so cool to get him back, but it just would make absolutely no sense for the Orioles. I think you also bring up a great point before we dive into the rotation, John, because we had a roundtable recently, and you brought up the point that, with Cedric Mullins and Ryan O'Hearn, both those guys could be eligible for qualifying offers. And if you give them a qualifying offer and they decline it, and then they sign with another team, you get a draft pick. So there is some value. It's not like both those guys are definitely going to walk away for nothing in November. You could still get value back if you hold on to them and then offer them a qualifying offer. And quite frankly, that might be the best case scenario for Mullins, especially because the Orioles probably don't want to lock him into a long-term deal because he's on the wrong 30 now and he's a center fielder. But maybe you say, hey, we still need a guy in center field for one more year. Let's offer him the qualifying offer. If he takes it, great. We have him under team control for 1 year. If he doesn't, that's okay. We get a draft pick. He also brought up the point that this team doesn't need more draft picks.
Yeah.
They need players who are going to be either big leaguers or are going to be big leaguers very soon, guys in the upper levels of the minor leagues. So a draft pick doesn't necessarily, it certainly doesn't help the Orioles contend in 2026.
Yeah, I mean, they have 6 picks next week on the first day of the draft, or 2 weeks from now. They have 6 picks on that Sunday night. They have the Sarasotos down in Florida are referred to internally as the most electric in baseball sometimes, because they have a ton of talent, and FCL games can be weird, but they're really good. Tomoyuki's got some good players. Between all these draft picks and all the international players that they've been signing and are getting a lot of results from, the idea of adding a couple more, I'm sure they'd love to do that, but it just doesn't seem like it fits the need. And I'm not sure how much that matters, but you do have multiple ways to play it and still get value if you want to.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about this rotation, because everybody that we thought was tradable 2 months ago is now no longer tradable, and everybody we thought had no trade value 2 months ago is tradable, with the exception of Kyle Gibson, who's no longer on the roster. But we've talked about how the Orioles have a million guys who are going to be entering free agency in just a few months, and the rotation is a spot where you could extract a lot of value from other teams, because starters have a high price on the market. And with the way that the market is set right now, with there being so many playoff spots, so many wild card spots, there are way more buyers than they are sellers. So the teams that are sellers have a lot of leverage, and the teams that can give up a starting pitcher on an expiring contract can extract a lot of value from another team. So you look at this Orioles rotation, you say there are some guys here that you might be able to get rid of for a couple months, and then reap in a haul of prospects here. But the problem is the guys that we thought were going to be the highest value guys in the market seem to have lost quite a lot of value. And it starts with Tomoyuki Sugano, who has a 4.06 ERA right now in 16 starts. After 7 innings of 1-run ball against Seattle on June 3rd, his ERA was 3.04. He was the best starting pitcher, healthiest starting pitcher in the Orioles rotation. Over the last 4 starts, that ERA has ballooned, and it is over the last 4 starts, it is 8.15, and it's gone up a full run over 4. In Japan, the schedule is set in a way that they have 6 games, then a day off every Monday, then 6 games, then a day off. So these guys are always on extended rest. The Orioles thought perhaps it would help Tomoyuki Sugano to have an extra day of rest. In his last start, they gave him a couple extra days. They had Brandon Young start, and then they had Tomoyuki Sugano start a couple extra days, or start a couple days after that. It did not work. And for a guy that is so reliant on his command, when he's off, he's really off, and he gets hit hard. What is going on right now with Tomoyuki Sugano, John?
First of all, you said to correct you when you're wrong.
Yeah, what did I say?
Tomoyuki Sugano earned a pitcher win on Friday in that 22-8 Orioles victory by pitching 5 innings of 7-run ball. So I think that's a good start.
Wins are the only thing that matter
pitcher
here.
wins. I think there's a couple things that are happening, and I think back to when I was down in Sarasota and saw his first live. He was facing my guy Beeves. He was facing Judd Fabian. He was facing Enrique Bradfield Jr. There was not a ton of stakes, and I had to wrap my head around the idea. He was getting hit by like high minors, good high minors hitters, but high minors hitters, and you realize what the stuff is at that stage, and you realize that a lot of what the Orioles were doing was trying to get him and Adley Rutschman to work together well and let Adley Rutschman, who's a very smart and cerebral catcher and who can get the best out of pitchers in ways we've seen a ton of times, that they work together and he learns how these pitches work, and he learns what Tomoyuki Sugano likes to do in these scenarios. So, that 4-start stretch you mentioned, the start at Sacramento and the start against the Angels, those were pitching into the 5th, 3 earned runs, and then Adley Rutschman gets hurt, I believe, on the day he was supposed to catch Tomoyuki Sugano in New York that Friday night, and then it's 3 2/3 and 3 runs, and then obviously without Adley Rutschman catching Friday night, it goes badly. His splits are pretty drastic when you split it out who's catching him, and we're talking about smallish samples, but I think this really matters. He had a 3.38 ERA with Adley Rutschman behind the plate, and 7.07 in 3 games with Gary Sanchez, and 5.06 with one Chadwick Tromp, session. So I think there's something to the idea that we're dealing with a pitcher where the margins are very, very fine. The things he has to do well, he has to do really well, and whether it's not having the pitch mix lined up the way you want it to, whether it's not having the confidence in what's being called, whatever it is, if that's not happening and he's not executing the way he needs to, there's a lot of damage that major league hitters can do to that particular arsenal. And I think that has a lot to do with it for me.
Yeah. And he's always going to have low walk numbers. He's in 94th percentile in baseball, according to StatCast, in walk percentage, but he's not going to strike guys out. 2nd percentile in K percentage.
Yeah.
He is going to have to be incredibly fine. He is going to have to paint the corners. And the problem is when he is missing in the middle of the zone, his stuff gets turned around and is hit incredibly hard, like it was against the Rays. And great that on Friday night he was able to complete 5 innings
and win
and pick up the win. But he did allow 7 earned runs. And that was a game that we've seen rarely, where the Orioles were able to overcome a massive early game deficit. That kind of start cannot repeat itself, obviously. And the way that he is pitching recently is certainly concerning. He's got so many different pitches, and he's got a great curveball when he's able to use it. But so far this year, he has been hanging that curveball a lot in the zone. Opponents are hitting 429 off his curveball, and it feels a little bit Charlie Morton-esque, guy who also relies. Charlie Morton relies even more off his curveball. But when you are missing on the curveball, and that's why it's a pitch that I think is not being phased out of baseball, but it's certainly not as popular as it used to be. Because when you miss on that, it is so easy to read and it is so easy to hit hard. And we saw that happen several times on Friday.
Yeah, and you can't in what I'm doing right now, and there's probably, now that I'm looking at it and starting to thought as I'm having it, his four seam rate was like the highest it's been all season on Friday, and the sinker went way down. So maybe it was just he was throwing four seamers instead of sinkers. That was, maybe there's something going on with StatCast, who knows? But this is somebody who pitches well when he is working off the fastball and not working with the fastball, if that makes sense. So I'm pretty interested to see how this goes going forward. I think there's a lot of, he signed with the Orioles this offseason for the opportunity they presented, wanted to win a World Series. That might not happen this year. But he's also had the opportunity to pitch for any other team that wanted him. And I'm fascinated to see what kind of market would materialize. Because honestly, people aren't going to say, oh, he gave up 7 runs against the Rays, maybe we won't trade for him. They're going to either like him or not like him. And he's not everyone's flavor is what I'll say. And that makes a difference as you're having these calls the Orioles are going to be having the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. Somebody who might be a little bit more everyone's flavor is Zach Eflin, who was terrific in his 9 starts last year for the Orioles, was great in his 1 postseason start for the Orioles. And we were talking about coming into this season, and maybe even for the first month of this season, about extending Zach Eflin as opposed to trying to trade him, or certainly letting him walk, because he was that good for the Orioles. And in his first 3 starts of the year, he was phenomenal. Then he goes on the injured list and he comes back, and it has been a mixed bag, to put it charitably. His ERA now is 5.95 in 12 starts. And to add injury to insult, left after just 1 inning on Saturday with lower back tightness, and now is on the injured list with back discomfort. And Tony Mansolino said after the game that Zach Eflin felt that back tightness in the bullpen, but wanted to pitch through it, still went on the mound, pitched 1 inning, and wanted to go back out there for more. We know he's a gamer, but at that point, you have to take the ball away from your starter and say, this is not an issue you can pitch through. He was getting hit incredibly hard in that 1 inning as well. And it's clear that whether he's not physically himself, whether he rushed himself back from that 1 injury, he is not the same pitcher right now that he was in the second half of last year, and certainly in the first 3 starts of the regular season this year.
Yeah, it's tricky for me because he was as good as you were saying, and it's hard not to ascribe. I mean, we know from Andy's story a couple of weeks ago that when he came back and gave up 1 million home runs, it was because something had changed physically based on how he was physically. And now when this type of thing happens with the back injury, it's not as extreme as Tomoyuki Sugano in that if Zach Eflin's not perfect, it's going to go badly, but he is a pitcher who fills it up. And I think there's a bit of a pattern here where the Orioles, in a lot of what they've done on the pitching side and the major league side and acquiring players over the last few years, has been good command, okay-ish to maybe not like elite stuff. Like there are teams that just want guys who have nasty stuff, and if you can throw it in the zone, great. And if not, that's fine too, because you have nasty stuff. And the Orioles don't seem to subscribe to that. They want somebody like Zach Eflin who's going to be able to fill it up and move the ball around the zone and keep hitters off balance. And ironically, it seems like kind of what Trevor Rogers has turned into. I don't know why I said ironically. That's just what he's turned into. I'm not really sure what he was with the Marlins. He seemed like he was just kind of like a fire breather, and now he's pretty
totally
good.
Different.
Yeah, now he's a pitcher. He's pitching well. But that just means the consequences of that when you're throwing the ball in the zone, you don't miss a ton of bats, is that if you're not perfect, it's going to get hit. And when you're dealing with major league hitters, it could get hit hard. And that's kind of where Zach Eflin is right now.
Yeah. And it's a guy that you were expecting to garner a lot of interest in the trade market. And right now it is just not materializing that way. And the fact that he's on the injured list now, we'll see how long he's going to be out for. But certainly, if he's on the injured list in a month's time, it's going to be incredibly hard, less than a month's time, to trade him. And if he's just coming back from the injured list and he's still struggling, it's also going to be difficult to trade Zach Eflin. So a guy that the Orioles thought they could at least rely on in the rotation this year and then at least trade some and get back something of value no longer appears to be that way.
Yeah. And you know, I'm just going to be the qualifying offer guy from now on. Like, I know they're not accepted hardly ever. And I know teams are sometimes afraid they'll be accepted. But Zach Eflin will get like a multi-year deal worth north of $50 million in free agency, even if he's not great this year. And there are worse outcomes than having to hang on to him. I think where it will be concerning is where he fits in the rotation as guys come back, and not necessarily next year, but the rest of this year. That would mean that you would be trying to move other guys. But Zach Eflin is somebody who I think has a track record that teams would still want if he's healthy, but we are setting ourselves up for like a week after the All-Star game showcase start for Zach Eflin. That's probably going to determine what kind of uniform he's wearing a week after that.
Yeah. So those are two guys in Tomoyuki Sugano and Zach Eflin whose stock has gone way down. Tell you whose stock has gone way up. Charlie Morton, who now has a 5.63 ERA, which is amazing to say. One, that we're happy for that, and two, to say that it's dipped that low, that it is lower than Zach Eflin's ERA by a good margin.
That's wild.
His first 5 starts in an Orioles uniform, Charlie Morton had a 10.89 ERA. They moved him to the bullpen. He made one spot start in the middle of that did not go well, and then he pitched well enough out of the bullpen that the Orioles moved him back to the rotation permanently on May 26th. Since then, he has a 2.89 ERA. He insisted during all of his struggles that his stuff was the same, and StatCast and everything that we could see backed that up, but he was getting absolutely crushed. He is no longer getting absolutely crushed. His stuff is playing very well, and he has turned himself into a quality starter, amazingly, this season for the Orioles. And frankly, if the Orioles had had any other option in May, they probably would have moved on from Charlie Morton the way that they did Kyle Gibson. But given all the injuries that they had to keep throwing him out there. They had to move him back to the rotation. And it amazingly somehow worked out.
Yeah, it's wild. There's going to be a lot of things that when we think back on this Orioles season, it's like, oh, that's, last year it was Adley. Like, Adley was really good. Everything was great. Something happens, they stop being good or great. And, it ends the way it does. And this season is going to be like the Charlie Morton trajectory. Probably at this point, if you had to assign like an avatar for the season, it's Charlie Morton. It's just a month of like, what in the hell is going on? And then progressively it's like, oh, okay. What was that? Like, this is good. What was that? And that's what's happening. Charlie Morton is somebody who I was very fascinated as he was going through it, because he was very clear that he didn't have to be doing this. He just wanted to be. And that's a weird perspective for some. It's a normal perspective for somebody to have. It's a weird perspective to hear from somebody who has a 10 ERA, because your question is, okay, then why? Why are you doing this? What is this for you? And in the context of him, I don't know what the next 3 months of his season holds. I do know that in the context of him trying to have it end better than it did for him last year, I'm sure he wouldn't have drawn up having the start of the season he did, but for him to be able to come from that, whatever happens from now on, I don't think he'll go back to having a 10 ERA in July. He could, who knows? But that is a cool thing for him.
It's great. Yeah. And for somebody who is incredibly honest with the media, somebody who has been great to us, it's good to see.
Yeah.
What would his ERA have to be? Or is it not ERA based for Charlie Morton to be tradable? Or is it just teams are able to throw out the first month of the season and convince themselves that this is who Charlie Morton is now?
I think it's Absolutely the latter. It would have to be a team that is adding to something good. I say that in the sense of, if we're talking about like when the Orioles traded for Jack Flaherty, I can't believe we're talking about Jack Flaherty again. They had,
we do that every podcast.
Yes, we do. But they had Kyle Bradish, who was had been one of the top 10 starters in the league for like a year at that point. They had a healthy Grayson Rodriguez. Tyler Wells was one of the best pitchers in baseball in the first half of 2023. Dean Kremer had overcome whatever happens to Dean Kremer in April and was back to being good again. They needed rotation help. They didn't need an ace, and they went out and got somebody who was, fine. And that's what I think a team like that could use somebody who on their day, you will win the game they pitch, and when it's not their day, they will still go out there and give you 5 innings, and you can save your bullpen, and you don't have to pay them a ton of money, and you don't have to worry about them after these 2 months are over. Like, that type of thing is valuable. If you are in a position that the 2024 Orioles were in, and you need somebody who is going to move the needle, and you need somebody who is going to count for the fans as a splash, that's not going to be Charlie Morton. But not everyone is in search of that. There are a lot of good teams that could use somebody in the back end of the rotation who's not terrible.
Yeah, and somebody who can just help a team get through the second half of the season. They're making the playoffs. They're already on the trajectory to be in the postseason, but maybe they want to keep their arms fresh. Some teams move to like a 6-man rotation in the second half of the season to keep their arms fresh. And they're not looking at Charlie Morton to start a playoff game. Maybe he can give them some innings out of the bullpen in the postseason, and now he's shown he can do that. But they would not be looking at Charlie Morton as a game 1, game 2 starter in the postseason. But there is still value for a guy that they know can go out there during the latter 2 months of the regular season and eat up some innings for you.
Yeah, and he's taking the ball, and we say this as he's pushed back a few days with elbow soreness, which
Yep. Yeah.
It sets off the spidey senses, but it's pretty good for him that he's got himself to this point.
Yeah. All right. Another guy whose stock has gone up.
All right, let's do this.
Let's dive into fellow man bun brother,
my man,
Dean Kremer, who has a 4.27 ERA. Again, another number that you look at it on its face and it's not that impressive. And then you think about where he came from this season, and it is mighty impressive because he had a month to forget in April, like all of his Aprils seem to have been. He had a 7.04 ERA at the end of April, and in the 11 starts since, a 2.98 ERA. Now his season ERA at 4.27 is just one tick off his career mark of 4.28. So it's slightly better than his career mark. Amazingly, somehow this season has turned into an average season for him. And John, you've written about last year. You were kind of the first to discover the split finger. I think you were a pioneer in discovering that Dean Kremer was adding a split finger to his repertoire. And boy, it has worked out for him.
Yeah.
It has been his best pitch over the last, year and a half now? 2 years?
Yeah, and it adds a dimension of, we're not talking about somebody that's going out there missing a ton of bats, but it is a pitch where he can miss bats and he can get some strikeouts and some weak contact. And I think that's important for Dean Kremer because he's not always, he can have those long at bats. He can have those innings where he's struggling to put guys away. He can have a couple extra pitches here and there over the course of an inning, means like an outing where he would otherwise be pitching into the 6th, he's pitching into the 5th and not really able to finish that. And there are some types of things that are explainable and unexplainable. The April thing is strange. The day game thing is strange, but Dean Kremer ends up where he typically does every year because he's just kind of a solid major league pitcher. Sometimes more than solid. On his night, he is way more than solid. And I think the downside is always is a little higher. He's not somebody I'm going to say this without even looking at it. I can't even remember last 2 1/3, 7-run Dean Kremer start. I know they existed in 2021. I don't think they happen now. They might be they might be 5 innings, 5-run type deals. You might not love it, but you are going to get what you are going to get. You're going to get a representative start from him.
Yeah.
And I think there's always value in that. You don't want Dean Kremer to be the guy you're holding up and saying, this is, the shining star of our rotation. I'm happy to do that. As somebody who thinks he's underappreciated, you don't want him to be the guy you're like, this is our dude, but he is very, very valuable to have in normal context.
It's just funny that he has turned into the guy that has stuck in this rotation for the longest amount of time. A guy that was not even acquired by this front office. That's how long his Orioles tenure has gone. He was in the Manny Machado trade in 2018.
Yeah.
And I feel like a quarter of my life has been spent watching Dean Kremer starts. It's just, he keeps going out there for the Orioles, and he's going to keep doing it for a while longer because he's still under contract through the 2027 season. It's amazing that he has this much service time left, but Dean Kremer is going to be in the Orioles rotation, and the Orioles can use a guy like that. You mentioned the fact that he goes deep into games. I mean, his shortest start of the year so far this year is 4 1/3 when he kind of got babbipped to death, as he said, in Kansas City and gave up 8 hits. Other than that, every other start has been 4 2/3 or longer. And that is valuable to the Orioles. I know he's kind of a polarizing figure on this Orioles roster, and he will continue to be as long as he's wearing an Orioles uniform. But Dean Kremer has a lot of value to a team that over the last, I want to say now 2 decades, but has not had a lot of rotation stability. And especially in this competitive window, has needed more rotation stability. He has been, for the most part, healthy and taking the ball every 5th day.
Yeah. I think I understand why people get frustrated with him, but I don't really. It's just a quality big league starting pitcher. There's no, that's what it is, and that's what he's pitching like. Other teams would probably, we're doing this in the context of like the trade deadline. I don't think you trade like Dean Kremer with 2+ years of service left. I don't know.
The idea is,
but you could probably get a lot for him. I don't know why the Orioles would, but I know that I would say that if the Orioles were able to acquire this version of Dean Kremer in like 2021 or 2022, they might have done it.
Yeah,
they probably would have done it.
Yeah, somebody who just eats innings for them would have been nice. I tend to doubt that he's going to be on the trade block, but it's nice to see that his season has turned around for the most part. Another guy who we did not expect to be singing the praises of at this point in the season, and that is one Trevor Rogers, who has a 2.05 ERA in 22 innings this season. His whole season was derailed early when he started on spring training hurt. And then he starts the season AAA Norfolk when he's finally healthy and has 16 1/3 innings and has a 7.71 ERA. And you're looking at the fact that he struggled in the 4 starts he made with the Orioles last year in the big league level after they traded Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers for him. And then you're combining that with the struggles that he had in AAA this year, and you're thinking this might be a total wash for Trevor Rogers. The Orioles might not ever get anything else out of Trevor Rogers if he can't even pitch the AAA level. And then, John, as you wrote about on the BaltimoreBanner.com, he rebuilt his lower half, and adding that strength to his legs really helped him regain his velocity on his fastball.
Yeah, and I'll point out that Jacob Calvin-Meyer, the Baltimore Sun, had probably a better story on
Disagree?
Okay, well, I'm going to say that.
But
yeah,
I'm always going to pump you up.
And he's sometimes a listener, so we'll see if he listens.
I think he's always a listener.
He's God bless him. They exist.
They do exist.
They exist.
They might all work for people that are, outlets that are also covering the Orioles.
Yeah, they might have to exist. But I think that, and we've talked about this on this platform over the course of the last year, where everyone knew the scope of what was going on and what needed to be done. And Trevor Rogers, probably most of all, but the Orioles had a lot invested in him. I think there's been a lot of people I've talked to. Tony Manzolino said it himself. I think there's been, I think Trevor Rogers has talked about it. This has been somebody who has been dealing with this process of getting himself back to being healthy and strong and the pitcher he wants to be in really unpleasant circumstances. Kyle Stowers and Connor Norby are going to be connected to Trevor Rogers forever. And the only thing Trevor Rogers can do about that is pitch well. He did not have the opportunity to do that after the trade last year because he was not physically well. He could not physically do the things that he needed to do to get to the results he wanted. I think Andy wrote a story after his first start where they were like, oh, this is what they identified and this is why this is happening. And when you think about the physics of why, when you are collapsing on your front leg and your body is opening up, it's that allows the hitter to see it earlier because you're coming around and you're showing them the pitch you're going to throw. And of course you're going to get hit hard with that. And there was times when the Orioles were trying to get him to do drills and things that he'd never done before. And he never had the experience of doing, and it was taking a while. And to do this as you're trying to get back onto a team that's trying to make the playoffs is really hard. And I think there's also it seems like we see his best velocity overall in the big leagues versus in AAA. And that feels natural, but it's not something you couldn't know that in August and September and May as he's not throwing as hard as he does in the big leagues in AAA. We were just saying, oh gosh, this is still low 90s and not terribly impactful. What is going to happen if he comes to the big leagues?
Yeah.
You just have to give a ton of credit to him and everyone involved. Justin Ramsey, who I talked to down in AAA, he's got a list of success stories behind him that is long and the credit goes to him for being the hands-on guy. But there's so many people in the organization who did it, and Trevor Rogers most of all, because what he did is really, really it speaks to what he is as a person, I think.
Yeah, it does. Justin Ramsey's next task, I think, is going to be to have to figure out what's going on with Chase McDermott right now, who is continuing to struggle. If you wonder why Brandon Young keeps getting big league opportunities over Chase McDermott, it's because McDermott has a 7.84 ERA right now in AAA. Not great. And his one big league start, obviously, this year did not go particularly well either. I just don't fully understand how one of the Orioles' top 30 prospects, top 15 prospects by some metrics, somebody who is considered right there with Cade Povich, has gone from a guy who had a 2.49 ERA in Norfolk 2 years ago. I mean, he reached the AAA level in 2023 and was good. And this guy looked like he was on the verge of the big leagues. Shout out to On the Verge podcast. And then the last 2 years, his ERA in Norfolk last year was over 4. And then this year, it's closer to 8. John, that's going to be your next task as well. You figured out what was going on with Trevor Rogers collapsing on his leg. You discovered Dean Kremer throwing the split finger. Now can you figure out what is going on with Chase McDermott and how he can fix it?
Yeah. So last year was when Chase McDermott debuted, right?
Yes. He made that one, I think still one start last year.
One start. Yes. And then he went down with a back injury and
yes. And started this season hurt as well.
Yeah. Just looking at this now, 40.1% zone rate in AAA. That's not going to do it. That's how you walk a batter per inning at that level. Could it be that we're talking about wild? I don't know if we're talking about wild misses. I don't know if we're talking about on the zone ABS,
how close is
how close we're getting
shadow zone.
But you're not going to get the benefit of the doubt. I'm looking. I just have his FanGraphs up. I didn't know. 40% first pitch strike rate in AAA. 11% swinging strike rate in AAA. Last year it was 15%. 2023 it was 13.9%. It's just not. Chase McDermott is somebody who had, I believe, the lowest or second lowest batting average against in 2023 in all of minor league baseball, his first full year with the Orioles, because he is able to and was convicted in throwing his stuff in the zone and getting weak contact. He didn't give up a ton of damage. He was able to, miss bats, and he was able to get weak contact. And that's clearly not happening right now. And if he's not in the zone, he's not going to succeed. So that's my, sitting here staring at a computer screen after talking for 50 minutes straight and trying to figure out what to say, answer. I'm sure there is another answer, but this is the opportunity. There's not going to be the opportunities that there are now for him in a couple months, next year, etc. This is the time when you want, if you're Chase McDermott, you want to be presenting yourself as an option to pitch for the Baltimore Orioles, because pretty soon in that AAA rotation, there's going to be some guys you've heard of.
Yeah.
And then you're going to be below the pecking order. You're going to be below them on the pecking order.
I'm not saying you need to figure it out now, but I think I'm trying to wave a story idea in front of you and seeing if, because Lord knows you don't have enough on your plate already, John.
Paul, I have like 7 3/4 reported stories, and I'm adding to that list by the day. So, but I will think about it. Honestly, if we're talking about Chase McDermott in this context of all the things we said, you can just stick him in the bullpen and it'll probably be pretty good. So like, maybe we're getting close to that.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are going to do our minor league check-in and talk about another pitching prospect that you need to keep an eye on the other side of this break.
For the 5th year in a row, Toyota is the best resale value brand according to Kelley Blue Book's KBB.com, including the 2025 Grand Highlander, best in resale value for midsize SUVs. Toyota, let's go places.
All right, John, it's time for our minor league check-in. And this week we're, surprise, picking another guy who is added to the Orioles farm system in 2023. Now, this guy was not drafted. He was not a member of the draft class in 2023, but he was added as an undrafted free agent after a very intriguing stint in the Cape Cod League. Somebody who did not pitch in college baseball in 2023 after he started at Liberty. And he has worked his way all the way up to the number 10 prospect in Baseball America's top 30 Orioles prospect list, which, John, you do.
Yes.
Why do you have this 6'5", 230-pound, 23-year-old right-hander Trey Gibson in your top 10?
So, Paul, stop me if you heard this before, but there's going to be an Arms on the Farm soon, and it's about Trey Gibson.
All right.
I've mostly written. I went to see him very early this season. It was like months ago at this point. He is a prototypical starter's frame, big, strong-looking guy. He didn't pitch in his junior year. He probably would have been like a top, definitely like early second day pick if based on the stuff that he had early in his career at Liberty. The Orioles were tracking him from when he was a high school player, but then the COVID draft happened. He wanted to go to school, and then he popped back up on the Cape, and one of their scouts was out there and said, "Hey, remember this guy? Like we should take a further look at this." Trey Gibson is somebody who has always been able to spin a breaking ball. He got into the Orioles pitching program, really benefited from the tandem starter stuff last year. There's a couple pitchers who did that and were able to build up their arm strength as the season went on. Braxton Bragg is one of them. We've talked about him. Trey Gibson, another. His fastball averaged 94.5 miles per hour for the season, but in the last month plus, it was 95.5, to speak to kind of how he was able to better execute his delivery and better repeat it and get into a routine, all the stuff that you do in your first full year as a pitcher. He's got a sweeper, he's got a cutter, he's got the fastball. He added a death ball, which is like basically like a hard vertical slider. That's a really good pitch. And right now he's missing a ton of bats. I think his strikeout rate was close to like 40% for most of the season. I'm not sure where it's ended up now, but he was somebody, as you know, I don't know why I say as you know, but last year in the second half, I wasn't able to do as much with a new baby arriving, but he and Nestor Herman were pitchers who we've talked about as well, were pitchers who, as I was doing this list, there were tears, after you got to like the Dylan Beavers, Judd Fabian, there was a lot of questions, and Trey Gibson and Nestor Herman were coming up as like probably the next best prospects in the whole organization. And that's, to get that as an undrafted free agent is pretty impressive.
Yeah. Of the guys that were in that 2023 draft class, I mean, Braxton Bragg, Zach Fruit, Nestor Herman, Michael Ferret, you're going to be hearing a lot of these names. We've already, Levi Wells, we've already said these names are on this podcast, and we're going to keep saying them because this could be a group of, I'm not going to say the cavalry's coming. I'm not going to make that mistake like a previous manager, but this could be a group of pitchers that is able to impact the Orioles rotation within the next few years. And boy, do they need that right now, because I'm looking at the Orioles rotation for next year, and it's awfully thin right now. If you count only the guys who are under contract, Kyle Bradish, you hope is back fully healthy after returning from Tommy John. You hope Tyler Wells is back and healthy after returning from his elbow surgery. You still got Dean Kremer in the rotation. Grayson Rodriguez is unfortunately a question mark right now, although Andy Kuska posted a video yesterday of him throwing in the bullpen yesterday in Texas. That's good to see, but till we see him back on the mound in a minor league game, he is still a big old question mark. Maybe Cade Povich, maybe Trevor Rogers, maybe Chase McDermott. A lot of names, not a lot of sure things. And not to say any of these 2023 guys are going to come up in 2026, because that would be awfully early. But the Orioles are going to need rotation help, and they're going to need it at some point.
Are absolutely candidates for that. And it's easy, not easy. It is a scout's nature to say, oh, that guy's probably a reliever, because most minor league starting pitching prospects end up to be a reliever. And I think that what we're going to see, and what's going to be fascinating, and we've talked about this a little before, is who gets the pathways to go and start every day in Norfolk. I don't know that there's going to be a ton of opportunity for some of these guys. This, Trey Gibson, Braxton Bragg, Nestor Herman, they all got to Bowie this year. I don't think there's a huge sample of us to pull from to say guys are only going to be in Double-A in the Orioles organization on the mound for like 3 months, but it's going to be, there's only going to be so many innings, because there's going to be all these rehab guys who are filtering into these rotations all at the same time. And at what point can they have a Norfolk rotation that is Braxton Bragg and Chase McDermott and Trey Gibson and Nestor Herman next year, and Levi Wells coming in for like 3 innings since? Can they do that? Will they do that? That's how you get these guys to where they need to be. That's how you make them major league ready, because that's kind of where they take the reins off and let guys go like 6 innings, 100 pitches, stuff like that. You can't really do that when you have AAA depth. And I think the end goal is that these pitchers are going to be productive major league pitchers. There's an open question at this point of how they all get to that point.
Yeah. Well, Trey Gibson is somebody we're keeping an eye on. His first 4 starts in Double-A Chesapeake already has a 2.79 ERA after he got the bump up from Aberdeen. So the results are certainly spectacular so far. All right. Thanks so much for tuning in. We've been talking for far too long. At John Meoli is his handle. I am at Paul Mancano. You can find the Banner Baseball Show anywhere that you get your podcasts: Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, wherever you get them. You will get the Banner Baseball Show. And of course, John has you covered on the BaltimoreBanner.com and his newsletter, Inside the Dugout. Right now, Andy is out in Texas to cover the remainder of this series. And Danielle Allentuck is writing great stuff as well. And so is Kyle Goon, our columnist. Thanks so much for tuning in. For John Meoli, I'm Paul Mancano. We will be back next week. Hopefully, I won't be violently ill, and we'll have